thank you for joining us as part of the series of sessions that we've been doing. Some of you have been here for the last 2 or 3 sessions now, uh, as part of the Make It Work series, right? And the whole series was to debate, discuss on some emerging trends, and see what's breaking up in the modern data stack or in the modern data architecture, and kind of figuring out how can we mitigate things and how can we better design and develop things, right? And that's the agenda for today. On call with us we have Ananth. Ananth, why don't you unmute your line, introduce yourself in terms of what you do currently, because I think you're one of the most prominent persons among data engineers with your newsletter. But I know a lot of things have changed and evolved for you as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, a lot of things changed. I used to work for Zendesk just before like a couple of months, and I'm taking a break and I'm working for a company called Moral right now. And My major focus is on building data products and understand like what are the things are breaking in modern data stack, and understanding from the organizational dynamics why why we can enrich the data usage and where's the gap. And I think the whole conversation around now is around data contract, why it's efficient, why it is needed for us at this moment is essentially based on seeing a repetitive pattern of the huge mismatch of incentives and alignment across the organization to deliver the quality data products. Right? So that's what I'm really focusing on right now. And as you mentioned, as a hobby, I write like Data Engineering Weekly as a weekly newsletter about data related information. And yeah, also writing a Schemata, which is a data contract platform. It's an open source built on top of very familiar, serialization format you might use like JSON, protobuf, or thread to build on top of understanding about organizational structure.
Perfect. And for those of you who do not know me, I'm Ashwin. I'm building this community for called as Data Heroes, but I'm building with a lot of other folks on this call today. I work for Talent, and I manage and support our global system integrators, and I manage a team of solution architects that support some of our very large deployments. And what I'm doing as part of the community effort is taking some of my learning and bringing some thought leaders like Ananth to kind of have that knowledge sharing platform where we debate on things. Before I start on this session, see the whole notion of and how we want to be different as a community is also kind of debate, challenge what we discuss. It is going to be a Q&A format for this session today. Please do post your question. All of you can unmute your line and ask a question as well. If you have questions, do post it on the chat. We'll pick it up. I'll send you the link to both the Slack and the Luma groups just for you to keep tab of what we're doing and some of the other future sessions that we are organizing as well. Usually, I do not record sessions, and that's just the way it's structured because we want arguments, we want people to cross-challenge and basically debate. So the format does not allow us to record and then share it with people. But for a change today, because there's a mistake from mine, I believe some of them have not got the Zoom invite or from Luma's end. So we would be recording the session and sharing it with some of you. Before we go ahead, there are a lot of other topics that would follow in the subsequent weeks. We're going to discuss on data processing, data transformations, newer data processing engines that are coming up, lake houses, and other data, and the whole notion of modern data architecture as well. We had covered a session around data observability. The video of that is on our community page on Luma. Right. So one last announcement, I think, before I pass it on back to Ananth, and take notes today, right? I have a little context. I think I'm not sure, Ananth, if you agree. Today, data engineers need far more skill set beyond core data engineering. They have to be good at writing content and memes, and I think that's one thing I want some of our community members to pick up as well. Create a blog summarizing a couple of your key learnings from today, right? So based on what you learn about contracts, how does it influence? And wherever you are and whichever part of the globe you are, we'll ship you a choice of speakers that we have here, right? So and with that, we move on to the topic of the day, which is around data contracts. something that I've been hearing a lot of blog posts discussing with Ananth as well, a couple of times around what is he building around, right? So again, data contracts is not something new from what I have heard. It's been there in some form or shape. But Anand, because you're building Schemata, I wanna basically ask you around what is a data contract in your point of view, and why is there a lot of buzz suddenly around data contracts, right? And let's start there, Anand.
Yeah, that's a good question, right? So I think to understand that better, I think we should go back a little back, like, what is the industry trend is going on, right? So, like data as it's standalone is not going to, it's not a standalone entity. The whole purpose of data is there is some business activities happening or some kind of action being taken by some users, and we capture the data and we try to understand what is the purpose of that, what is the purpose of it, and trying to create more meaningful insights out of it. Now, if you look into this whole data industry, early 2000-ish, 2005-ish, like a predominantly been dominated by, there's like you will tend to run like a one big vertical machines, like it's a vertical server or Teradata, so whatever it is, right? So, and then the whole data team is like a well self-contenced. You will have a data architect. So every data
Yeah.
change has to go through the centralized data team as an architect to kind of understand what is, the whole organizational business meaning, and then they are, design the schema and all sort of things happening there. Now, that is kind of a that's kind of started to, it's a flawed approach. It worked to a scale because in 2005 is like data is largely a back office work, right? Like, I mean, there is not much of data product or not much of machine learning products being deployed and drive the features of a product. Now that has been changed, and that's changed rapidly. And then when that shift started to happen, people realized that the centralized data team not going to scale, like a centralized architecture team to kind of manage. So if you go back to 2005, your centralized architecture team or the person is a data contract, is the human form of a data contract, essentially, if you can imagine that. And the Hadoop then started and say, like, oh, you don't need to model anything, you just send the data to us, we'll do the processing, it's cheap hardware, cheap, storage is separated, and all sort of things happen there. It's partly because we will not able to scale that centralized data contract person. Like, even though we call it as an architect, it is really a contract person. He negotiated with the two parties and understand, build those model, and then say, like, hey, this is a finalized model, you send this and I send this one. And
Right. So, data architect and a data modeler as well. See, in
yeah,
the legacy world, we
yeah,
had so at least coincidentally, I was sharing with Rajesh as well this book on Ralph Kimball, and coincidentally, I had to just fresh some stuff because I was researching on data contracts, and I was like, I want to go back to that book and see what has been codified there.
right.
How does it differ, Anand? Like, so we had a traditional data modeling practice, largely related to analytics, right? So it was for the purpose of driving BI, and there was a data modeler who was doing and understanding, coordinating with business, and kind of specifying your LDM, CDMs, and your schema definitions. Um, how is it currently being different, right? So when you say that fails, where does it fail?
Yeah, that fails because you have to build those skills. Like, the whole Kimball model started with, like, if you read that carefully, you have to first sit together and understand those business bus matrix, that you have to build the business bus matrix, and then you
Yeah,
have to derive that one. That approach is not going to scalable, right? The business bus matrix and then the deriving, that's eventually the contract approach that you are trying to build in the Kimball world. um, the reason why it is failing, the rate of change, the rate of feature delivery is like, 2008 is 2009 is the whole DevOps model started to flourish, and like all sort of a new improvement happening in the application development side. You got like microservices, fast way to build, robustness of CI/CD pipeline, and
yeah,
things accelerated the development velocity. It's no longer, and then when we look back and like, okay, then if you go and tell the company, like, oh, you need to create this business bus metric because to do that one, like, nobody really has the time because the rate of change and the rapid pace of a development life cycle improved a lot significantly, right? I think that is where the data contract essentially comes in. when you are
Is
doing
data
that.
contract a schema definition? Like just clarifying for the benefit of everyone, you've got a mixed audience of core data warehouse led folks and modern data fact folks on the call. Is data
Mhm.
contract just a schema specification or a definition?
Yeah. So contract by definition, right? There is a shareable agreement between two parties to
Yeah,
understand and incorporate. Like if you take a gRPC protocol or any other API service that you are trying to build, there is a set of standard and set of promise that
yeah,
we will not break the backward compatibility and like so. So when you specifically talking about data contract, there's a two part of the data contract. One is the structural part of the contract and the behavioral part of the contract. The
yep,
structural part of the contract is where your schema, like would like let's say taking a user ID, username, is it all part of this field? What is the entity looks like? What is the
yep,
fields looks like? And what it represent? Who owns it? Who's responsible for it? How frequently it is coming in, and when it is coming in. So these are all the things are like very kind of structural guarantees. And then there's a behavioral guarantee, right? Like say you define the user ID, it's supposed to carry the logged in user's ID, and the website might have a non-logged user. You should not send like session ID into user IDs, and everything is kind of going to break all the time, right? So,
yeah.
and that's the secondary part of it, like behavioral side of it, and that's where this kind of data testing coming in to kind of fulfilling that kind of a behavioral more testing here.
Yeah. So are you saying with data contract first approach, you don't need to essentially do modeling? I know Gagan has a question here. Uh, Probably after you take my question, I know Gagan has raised his hand.
Not necessarily. What I'm trying to say is that data modeling on like the way of building this Kimball methodology is kind of
Yeah,
going after that. So there's some other form of data modeling techniques that we need to adopt. So recently I wrote about like functional data pipelining, right? Like
correct. Yeah.
how we kind of think about like entity and events, how do we kind of capture that and model that one. The whole Kimball methodology, my criticism on that is it built on the time when, though the concepts are really, really relevant, like how do you handle slowly changing dimension, how do you handle time travel, that's what we are trying to solve. Fundamentally data modeling is all about handling the slowly changing dimension. How can I enable the time travel? How do the facts and entities connected, like the
How
entities
are they
and
related with each
how,
other?
how
Yes.
are they related to each other's, right? um but the Kimball model is kind of built around like when the storage is scarce,
Yeah.
right? There's a scarcity of the storage. We are no longer living in that site, right? It's not like we could throw the storage all along, but there are another related data modeling techniques you can adopt that can thrive. So data contract is not a replacement for a modeling. In fact, it's
Okay.
an enabler for certain way of modeling techniques.
So it can sit on top of data modeling essentially even before you develop your model, or agree on how that model should look like. You're basically putting people into perspective and say, hey, this is what it is, and you're documenting and managing that workflow. Is that what data contract is? Because I'm still not clear on what. I understand the spec part, the expectation, but how does that coordination between, because always a contract is signed between two parties,
Mhm.
and I'm trying to relate that with the API contracts that were there, like standardization and let's say RAML, Swagger, OAS, whatever, right? So and then that led to a lot of tooling. And what, in your perspective, would complete your data contract, and how does that workflow flow through?
Okay, the workflow, right? So if you think back, there is a how does a developer produce a software? A business requirement comes in, or any kind of tickets or any requirements that we're working on. We're writing a code, which
Yeah.
is a promise that I deliver this work to someone. And then there is a checklist of verification that says like, yes, this is working. And then we get onto this. You go through the code review process. The CI/CD pipeline verifies this is all working on that. So whatever the developer promised to deliver from set of requirements has been fulfilled. And CI/CD pipeline is a verification for that. And we all have continuous verification on top of it, like your monitoring and observability infrastructure on top of it, right? This
Perfect.
is this is exactly the developer flow goes like. I, I,
Yeah.
I consider the workflow for the schema data contracts, or it's exactly the same. I'm going to produce this metrics. I'm going to produce this particular event. This is what I'm going to produce. And then this is a pull request comes in. So it's like people kind of see that, okay, this is fine. And there is a set of CI/CD pipeline that is kind of validate whether it is adhered to the standard, it adheres to the certain data modeling techniques. And then there is a continuous data monitoring and pipelining is running in and make sure that the behavioral part is really behaving well.
Okay,
So,
it also continuously monitors. I'll take a pause here. Gagan, go ahead, ask your question.
yeah.
Thanks, Ashwin. Anand, the question I had is like whenever the way you describe the data contracts to start with, right? I could draw a similarity directly with how API documentation is written
Yeah.
in products.
Yes.
It has a clearly defined schema of what you can expect from the API, and then it is being managed by someone. There is a clear owner for it.
Yeah.
And it's very similar. So I just want to understand what more differentiates a data contract.
Yeah, that's a pretty good question, right? So if you take a typical API request response model, there is a huge difference between the way the producer consumer dynamics works in the API versus the data contract essentially. When we are exposing an API, the producer takes a known input and produce a known output, right? If I'm exposing user creation, like, if you call this user create and you send me some user details, I'm going to create an entity in the database and give user true or false, right? It's a very single dimensional approach. It's a known input, known operation, known output. The data contract on the other side, the producer and the consumer has one-to-n relationship. What I mean by one-to-n relationship, let's say you're generating this user entity again. Some machine learning model might rely on the email address to understand what is going on. Some machine learning model might look into latitude and longitude and understand where the users are coming from. So each and every field or the combination of a field might have a significant impact on certain branches of work. So that's why I mentioned like one-to-n. So the contract and the quality of those data has the behavioral structure of it has to be always seen from the consumer perspective rather than the producer perspective. That's a significant change. That's a significant change, I would say, in the data
For
contract
data teams.
specification. Yes.
And I think for data teams, this is new, right? I think to Gagan, to your point, for API teams, I think for the last 4 or 5 years, I think the API definition, right, which whatever we used to do to declare how your API spec should look like. And there's a lot of open source standards that have come up, whether it is OAS and all of that, to kind of codify and standardize how that spec will look, what's the input parameter, what can you expect, and then the entire automation of testing. I think data in the data world, I think it's just getting started. And people like Ananth are just starting the revolution on that. I think the baby steps right now, if I'm not wrong, Ananth. And I think testing and all of that validation would naturally evolve. I think that's the natural evolution of this whole data spec or data contracts, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah. I mean,
I know I answered for you. I know I answered for you, Ananth.
Yeah, does it answer the question, Gagan, or like any?
Yes. So that makes me think probably there is some kind of transformation on top of what a producer usually produces to fit to the needs of the consumer.
Right.
Yeah, that's good to know. And yeah, if you have any, like if there is any similar spec for a data contract, or if you have written a blog about it, it would be helpful for me if you can share a link somewhere.
Sure.
Yeah,
Thanks.
sure.
We'll definitely do. I think we should definitely do that. I think Anand's product is open source and it's available on GitHub. I think definitely fork it out and try it out as well. I think early stages in my point of view, but I think there's a lot of scope based on your feedback that Anand can and pivot into and solve for it, right? I think there's unlimited scope. I think this is just a start. Anand, on a similar pattern, a question that Gagan has asked me, I had one question, like when you say data contract, what are the minimal things that should be there? Schema definition, ownership, what time will it arrive? Like what do you think should be documented in an ideal data contract? and where it should be documented? Where should it be documented today?
Certainly not in your Confluence page or in Google Doc.
Okay.
So that is kind of killing the purpose of like the whole like programmatic way of approaching certain things. What is should be in the minimum, the minimalistic data contract? Obviously, ownership is not most important part of it, and what is the skeleton of the data that you are emitting? Without like what is really contained, there is no way people can access that one. And then another very basic check. I think to Gagan's point again, like to explain more like why data contract is a very collaborative work rather than producer define the schema. When you are producing a data and you keep producing the high quality data, the usage adoption will increase. It's like a typical your urban planning, right? Like if you have a congested road and you're expanding the road, more people will travel through that one, you'll get more and more congested. The similar thing, like when you are producing high quality data, the more and more users coming in, the more and more users comes in, the more and more different set of expectations about the behavior of the data. So it is not the data contract not going to remain static. It's a very collaborative way to kind of adopt over the period of time. So at a very bare minimal, have the structure, have the clear ownership, and a clear workflow to evolve the contract further. So it is not like a one-time negotiation, you done it and then you're done with it, right? That's why it's not like a written in the blood path. It is a productivity tool to kind of align along as the business requirement has been changing. You enable the consumer and say like, hey, this user model is giving me pretty high quality data, and I wanted to understand how the user is coming in. This can be happen like after maybe a year after that, and it's like, oh, I'm going to access now latitude, longitude. Can you make sure it is not null? Can you backfill that? Can you do certain guarantees around that so that I can build some data products out of it, right? So I think that is what I would focus, like ownership, bare minimal skeleton, and focus more on the workflow to make incorporate the consumer feedback into your workflow.
Yeah, curious natural extension on that point that you made, like null attributes and all of that. How does data contracts, data quality, and all bind together? Because I think data quality is like one of the fundamental reasons why a lot of pipelines break, a lot of decision making gets broken. With a contract first approach, you're bringing the producer and the consumer together in one platform and saying, guys, define what you want, define how it is to be there.
Right.
With that, do you think downstream you can stop a lot of data quality issues? Is that how you envisage the overall problem statement to be solved?
So,
and how is that binding going to happen?
So I wouldn't say like it will stop all the data quality issues, because it's never going to stop any data quality issues.
Yeah, it could stop from flowing, right? If let's say you don't expect a value.
So when you're talking about data quality, right, there are two different types of data quality. One is people calling this data testing. Data testing, the whole concept of data testing is to capture the known unknown upfront, right? If null value comes in user ID, my model will break. This is a known unknown. Like whether the ID will come as null or not, I don't know, but I know that will be breaking. So I upfront clearly explaining that, hey, this should not be happen. There is influence, like there is a contractual agreement, like it's an explicit statement, not an implicit assumption. That's what data contract bringing
And contracts, are they implemented at the logical layer right now? How do you enforce that in the physical layer?
Yeah, so contract, it's also responsible for contract to kind of continuously monitor to make sure that this contract is established, right? The reason why I say the data quality cannot be fixed, essentially, things can break in very, like, anything is true, like, anything can go wrong, will go wrong in production all the time, and it can break. So you cannot capture all the known unknowns. There will be unknown in certain cases that can potentially come and harm us. So that's why this whole anomaly detections and data observability tool trying to capture those known unknown. But what data contract enable that once you capture this unknown data quality issues, that time you convert the problem space to a known unknown. You can define some rules into your system, and then as the contract evolve, the more and more robust your the data asset getting produced. So that is a whole. That's why I keep on pressing on the workflow. From the day one, if we can predict everything what going to happen in the future, it's never going to happen. It's it's all about like 1% improvement, and then data contract essentially giving you that tooling enable for you to kind of collaboratively create the data.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of questions on the chat. We'll pick it up in some time. It's coming from, I think it's all from Rajesh, if I'm not wrong. So yeah, we'll definitely pick it up, Rajesh, in some time. So you spoke about constraints and schema constraints. You can have schema validation checks done and all of it. Can I extend that beyond that? So for example, in a city or a state column, I have a dictionary of values that I only want to have. I only want a certain set of values to be there, or I want that value to follow a pattern, a regex pattern. Can I codify that also in a contract? And can I use that for continuous monitoring?
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you there are like a little bit of open source tools trying to do the same thing. If you take there's a Google EL project, I think it's kind of a codification of your data rules. Understand the data, to continuous validations. So definitely you should be able to do that in the data contract. And if you take some tools like data expectation, for example, it's exactly trying to do the same thing, right? It's trying to say, it's trying to kind of give you the rule-based approach and say like, hey, you create this set of, you create this data assets. Here's a set of rules to kind of make sure that the current state that you are producing is valid, and then you success or failure, right? So,
but it's still a post action after the data has been loaded, right? It's not monitoring while the data is being loaded. So it's not like a contract. It's more of a scanner that runs or a test that runs during the data load.
Right. I think so before loading, right? It's a little bit complicated because we are not moving, like when you're running a data transformation, we are not moving data from point A to point B. Even though we do that theoretically, we do apply some transformation function, which is very often it is very black box. Yeah. If you're writing in SQL, it's very like one of the criticism of SQL is like how to test a transformation in the middle. Like it's kind of taking from one part and moving to another part. So once you transform one shape to another shape, then only you can verify whether the shape is correct or not.
Yep.
You can apply some validation upfront to make sure, hey, I wanted to make this shape, whether the previous shape is correct or not, in order for me to make this particular shape. So anything that we are doing a precondition check is not going to give us a full flow validation on the transformation. There's another part into that one. In a data pipeline, the speed and the correctness, there is always a trade-off between a speed and correctness. Speed, correctness, and volume. So you can get only 2 out of 3. What I mean by that, if you want your pipeline to run fast, then you have to process the data less. You cannot wait for all the data to come in, and then you want it to run through this validation check and make sure everything is fine because you're tuned for speed. But if you want correctness, then you have to process all the data and say like everything is fine, and everything is fine. Then you are compromising on the speed of the pipeline. So it's a mixture of those two things. So data quality is subject to your pipeline priority. What do you want to prioritize? What you don't want to prioritize?
Correct. Yeah.
So I think that's why the data contract comes into play. When a consumer trying to access, I don't know what priority that is important for them. How long I'm afford to wait for them to run through those data quality checks. So explicitly defining the consumer expectation. Well, latitude longitude is very nice, but this is, I want a warning alone. I don't want it to be like kind of, I don't want you to stop the pipeline, but just warn me if there is some delay or sorry, if there is some null values in the distribution, just tell me that one, right? So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have like, I know we've been talking data contracts and kind of defining the specs of what needs to be there, what we can achieve. Uh, Anand, if you can help the forum understand around, put things into perspective, right? Let's say you're doing a warehouse implementation. Uh, where do you define, at which stage do you define the contract? How does the contract get implemented? Uh, some thoughts on that, Anand?
So let's say we are going to produce ARR, annual
Yeah.
recurring revenue as a product that you are going to deliver that one. And it could be directly consumed by some consumer or some kind of machine learning model being trained upon to kind of predict your ARR model, what will happen in the future, for example. So how do you define the data contract? Essentially, you first start with your skeleton and say like, okay, I'm going to produce an ARR, but ARR, a metric standalone will not make any sense. It has to have some associated dimensions in order for you to, make a meaning of it. So defining that skeleton, like ARR, is it for account basis? Is that for an overall revenue basis?
Yeah.
Additional, is it a single business unit? Is it a multiple business unit? So having those skeleton in place kind of help us to kind of understand what is really kind of going on in that case. And then the
And
second
contract would be developed, like just passing you there, contract should be developed per domain entity, or like even for a table level, or like with data products, it becomes easy, right? It's a finished manufactured good that you're exposing. So I can go through that back and forth uh, coordination with my business user in developing that. Do you recommend only at that level, or it can fall down into some of the lower grained table level also?
Yeah, so I think any interface or any system that has to integrate it with multiple other downstream systems, I believe the data contract is an optimal tool for us to implement here. Because often I notice that when the friction is pretty high, the friction is pretty high when there is a cross team collaboration that requires that certain table kind of exposed to different stakeholders. If you're starting something new, a data contract to me as a purist can say like, hey, has to be everywhere, but the tangible benefit that you will get when you put in the edge, put into this an interface where other teams can collaborate and then utilize that. When you start to expose certain tables or data products, or even creation time of it, like developers instrumenting some data, it's coming to data. I think that edges is where you can see the maximum yield of your data contract.
Got it. And in an implementation standpoint, like you'd have spoken to customers and all that, how should they actually visualize this entire thing? Saying that, hey, my contract is getting broken, like I've got a schema change today. Uh, how do you communicate that with different stakeholders currently? And is that a UI for people to go and fix it? Is there a U? How is the downstream getting notified?
Yeah, so there's like, as I mentioned, right, there's the code check-in, the CI/CD pipelines running in, and then there's a continuous monitoring. So it's like a compile time validation versus a runtime validation. The structure of the property can be very well valid in the compile time. It's not, you don't need to kind of go through this runtime. So let me break down a little more on that. What I mean by compile time, essentially, let's say I have defined the schema and I'm going to change the name of the field. I'm pretty sure this is going to break the backward compatibility.
Correct.
So it has to be, so the whole schemata, when we're building this one, the whole workflow built on top of GitHub. So when a developer or anyone trying to change the contract and then they modify the field name, the CI/CD pipeline itself will fail and tell them, giving them an immediate feedback, hey, this will break the backward compatibility. Or so the structural validations and all those processes kind of should be part of the developer workflow. It should not be part of, or you deploy somewhere and I will figure it out when at runtime it is break or not, right?
Yep. Yeah, and if that is the case, does data contracts also have to have a tab on lineage on the downstream systems, or it should be handled in the code level?
So if you started to define your skeleton, and you will know who is the owner and who is asking the contract, it
It'll already
essentially,
be there.
and then which column is related to this one. The lineage is like a byproduct out of it. It not only give you the not only give you the table level dependency. I think when people talking about lineage, they were missing out, like, lineage is not a single dimension, it's a multiple dimensions, right?
Yep.
You can go with the column level lineage, you can go with the table level lineage, and you can go with the team level lineage, like which team owns this particular part of the tables or the pipeline, which other teams own that one. So all those layers you can easily capture by defining this data contract.
Okay. See, I'm convinced on one part, right? See, because I've seen the API contract world and the benefits of the API contracts, and I always felt there's a huge gap in defining for structured and structured data, and how we deal with data today. Uh, like, do you think that data contracts, because it's amazing, right? I'm solving for a producer consumer problem. I'm bringing both of them into an interface. It could be through code or a GUI, whatever it is. uh, I'm bringing an agreement between two parties, and I'm monitoring for breakages. That's fine. But in enterprises, in a lot of customer places, there's also a catalog, which serves as a reference repository for tracking lineage. Changes are monitored from there and all of that. How does this integrate with catalog, do you think, or is it duplication of efforts?
Um, it depends upon how the organization wanted to value, right? So when you are talking about data catalog, you are trying to build you are trying to build a memory palace of knowledge graph, and say, like,
Yeah.
this is the
So,
knowledge graph that I'm
correct,
building.
correct. Yes.
Now the fundamental question is, like, what level of knowledge graph that you wanted to do. Sometimes, like, when you just build everything as a knowledge, like you just index everything in Google, it's very hard for you to understand what is trustable, what is not trustable. And is it good enough to go through this knowledge graph to understand what is really happening? Just because there is a knowledge graph, that doesn't mean that it is usable, right? It is still up to the interpretation of a human to
Correct.
understand it. Now, the real question is essentially is it a data catalog as an approach or a data contract as an approach? Data contract very well can provide more and more metadata, additional trustable sources to data catalog. But it's a question really, like, what is the data catalog that you are using? What is the purpose of using the data catalog, right? I think that's kind of answer whether it's. I don't see data contract as kind of it's kind of a data catalog, or
Yeah, it's
uh,
not a data catalog, but
it's,
can
yeah.
you? Do you see a use case where the contract specification? Because see, you're documenting something very unique. The owner of that asset. That's
Right.
a problem. See, in go to a catalog, the problem is who owns that data, right? I know I can track lineage, but who owns that data? That's a problem. Whereas in data contract, you're starting with defining, hey, this is your producer, these are the downstream consumers. You solve a very intelligent problem, because by definition, on paper, it looks amazing. But can I also integrate that with the catalog? And do you foresee that? That's the question.
Will data contract, is there a question more? Will data contract platform can emerge as a data catalog tool? Is that a question?
Will you integrate or probably emerge also? You can take that both the question.
Yeah, I mean, data pipeline or data engineering is a very highly interdependent set of products, right? Even though we kind of say that this data quality is a category, data catalog is a category, and orchestration is a category, but everything has interconnected in some way or another thing. There's a fair bit of overlap to this
Yeah,
one. So when you're building this kind of tool, there is a maximum chance where the boundary kind of blur and what is the most
yeah,
meaningful option for to do that one. Data contract can go multiple phase, but I think what is really, really important is to solving the core problem, which is
correct,
we kind of build a set of specialized convenient tools. Like, I would say, like, modern data
correct,
science is a set of convenient tools, right? But how do those convenient tools working together, and then how does it incorporate the different stakeholders to enable the conversation
Correct.
make more and more data quality product, quality of data creation, right? That's what the whole mission is.
Yeah, quality, and in fact, kind of standardize how data is produced and consumed in an organization. I agree with that. I know. I have more.
Yeah, I just want to add
Right.
one point, right? One thing I realized in working in companies like Slack and then coming from outside and seeing the other companies, the major difference is that it is not the tool. Everyone has an equal access to the tool. Everyone has an equal access to their talent. The only differentiator I found out why these companies able to successfully build, data, successfully integrate data into their product strategy.
Correct.
They have very high quality data creations process. In Slack, everything is kind of a giant thread structure, well structured, well documented. It's kind of data contract implemented like 2016, right?
Mm.
So there are companies who actually implement it. So this is not something coming out of thin air, and somebody's trying to do that. It is there. If you take like a Meta recently wrote about like their event ingestion platform, purely built on top of this data contract way, how they kind of build a layer on top of Thrift to kind of enable that one.
Correct.
I feel that is a difference. When you are producing a high quality data, you will able to succeed much. The tools are much more effective than other things.
Perfect. That's a great answer. Let's take a pause. Aman, I'll go with your set of questions first. Why don't you unmute your line, ask those kind of questions? Aman, if you're there, or did you drop off?
Hey, Ashwin, I didn't hear.
Yeah, I know you've got
Yeah,
2 questions, so go ahead.
yeah. Right, I'll just read them out. So, very interesting, all the things that you talked about data contract and how it applies in the data warehousing world. My question is that uh, how to go about change management while establishing the data contract. So we have established, we have it all signed off, etc. But where does the change management part comes in? That is one. Should I ask the next one also?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. The next one is, does the data contract also limit us in terms of what way we can expose our data to the downstream? Like for API, it is quite easy that we have the RAML specs specified, and these would follow unless otherwise I'll have to make some changes. But there are other ways to expose, like views, direct access, DB link, and all those previous ways to expose data. Do they still apply in the data contract word, or we'll have to go via API only?
Oh, great
Yeah.
questions, Aman. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question, right? So data contract as a definition is not a physical interface to kind of the exposing. It is an explicit definition what you are exposing. So if you're exposing as a view, you can define the view as a contract. View, like is it a materialized view or a logical view? And when you're creating a new table, essentially you're creating a materialized view, and when you're creating a logical view, you're just creating a reference to that view, right? So it doesn't really dictate how the underlying exposing going to be look like. It is just ensuring that both the parties have the clear agreement and understanding what is really being extended. So it's not really a replacement of your logical view, or maybe you introduce some kind of GraphQL API on top of it. It's not a replacement for those kind of things.
Okay.
I think the first question for that, like, how do we go about the change management?
Change management.
Yeah, I kind of touch base on a little bit on that front, right? The effect, we solved the effective change, like we solved the change management in the code by GitHub. GitHub is by far the most robust change management process that we kind of implemented, like branching, versioning, CI/CD checks, and all sort of things kind of bundled together. And then it's enabled a very healthy collaborative environment to that one. So I would say like data contract of these things, kind of change management, should be built on top of GitHub, not necessarily. No, that's why I kind of mentioned the first opening statement itself. Like certainly not a Google Doc or a Confluent page to define this contract.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks, Anand.
There's another question from Harish here. How does data contract differentiate from data governance? I think you want to pick that up, Anand. I can add my points later.
Yeah, so data governance is a kind of a very vast field, right? The definition is like going beyond definitions. Now, the real question essentially like which, why does the responsibility ship? One, like all those data assets been created, and then there is something like, the legal team or anyone kind of say that, hey, I wanted to enforce certain data governance practices here. This is how we govern, and then write those documentations around that. It's a very inefficient workflow. I seen multiple times it's again and again failing, and it requires like a larger program management to trigger it and understand. And
When you say failing, you mean the catalogs are failing, right?
yeah, the catalogs are essentially
Yeah.
like the catalog as a definition is a passive system right now, unfortunately, right? It absorb all. It's it's a data. Actually, I kind of wrote a recent article. If I think it's a good article to share, like about data catalog and broken promise. The way kind of data catalog kind of envision right now is kind of an integration platform. You just connect different sources you accommodate, and then you do certain things, and then there is a hoping that you can propagate that change management to multiple tools. Right?
Yeah.
Let's say I crawl some tables created in Snowflake, and then the legal team can select, oh, this is a PI information. They just stack in the PI information. Data catalog tools have some data governance provisions there. And yes, you tapped in PII, so what after that, right? And then you have to go through this whole lot of program management to say that this has to be incorporated. And
Correct. Yeah.
and then the challenge is that in a very market-driven dynamics, everyone wanted to step on the other fields. The imagination of data catalog will somehow magically be integrated with all the other upstream systems. It's very, very hard. And it often, we gone through the stage where we as a developer has to integrate a lot this data governance tools into our existing ecosystem or even the commercial providers.
I'll agree with you, Anand. Right? I think we had a chat on that. I've been having some chats with folks on this call as well. Catalog implementations are too tough, too tedious, too long. Never see the light of the day. It's becoming what the MDM initiatives are, but then they're required. I'm not saying it's not required. I may differ with you on that. They're required. They serve a definite purpose today in documenting. And kind of doing and addressing a lot of use cases, except that we wish it can address a lot more active use cases as about being just a reporting system or a documenting repository, which is what it is currently being used. I think integration of observability tools into the catalog, or catalog becoming more observable around pipelines, around data, etc., would make catalog tools more stronger. More on that another day. This another question from Ganesh, and then I'll go to Rajesh. He's got three different questions. In the interest of time, Ganesh has a question around: does data contract help data engineers to build effective data pipeline for it? I think absolutely yes. I can answer on Anand's behalf. See, because when you as a data engineer start to build, you're actually reacting to a business requirement. Or a requirement for, let's say, you're building a report, you're calculating something, you're publishing a model, whatever it is, right? So it's about bringing the producer and the consumer on a platform and saying, hey, this is what you wanted. Is it meeting your expectation? Are these columns enough? Do you want more fields to be added? Do you want me to compute it differently? Is this schema definition fine? And who's owning these set of fields and all of that? I think that definitely solves and addresses and all of it. There are tools. Definitely, Schemata is one of them. In my point of view, Anand, correct me. Data contract as a space is evolving. It's just getting started. It's, I would say, in its 0.0.1 version right now. It'll evolve into whatever imagination you can think of, right? Meaning, it can become part modeling, part cataloging, because also you're documenting a lot of things. Part observability. I think it can evolve to a lot of things, but I think that's for founders like Anand to basically go into the market and drive that, and for people like us to basically give feedback around what our expectations are on a platform like this, right? So uh, Rajesh, in interest of time, go ahead and mute your line, ask your questions.
Hey guys, I think I've already put my questions there, but another one of the more fundamental ones, since you kept the CI/CD as an analogy, I have looked at this engineering side workflow. Here, the understanding is that these tools are baked in the company's own premise, right, by some IT teams in some ways, right? The question on my mind is, let's say I am an engineer who is actually modifying some data table or some which is being used by the downstream teams. At the time when I'm committing, let's say I put this in the CI/CD flow, is that where you expect the data contract to be first triggered?
Yes, totally. Like, especially for the structural part of it. So when I have a schema definition defined and I'm trying to change the column name, I pretty much know that the column name will break the backup compatibility. Or you can also add additional layer on top of it. It's essentially kind of a linting, right? Like, I mean, you have some data, code quality format is kind of misaligned, and you just say that, oh, this is misaligned, and you can break this down, uh, break the merge process essentially, right? So for structural process, I think the theme essentially, the more earlier feedback that we give, the more easier to fix it. So I would imagine it'll be sitting top of a CI/CD, like as part of the developer workflow.
So essentially, the primary customer for data contract is a software engineer or a developer.
I wouldn't call as a customer.
I'm saying the primary user. I
Yeah.
would want to couple it because eventually CI/CD pipelines are going to be run by him.
Well,
Who are you, I mean, who will take this data contract to the developer? Is my point. Is CI/CD pipeline?
right, but like, so data contract by definition is a two-sided marketplace, right? There's a producer and a consumer.
Sure.
The
But I'm saying
producer
the guy who has to first enforce is this guy who is changing the schema, right?
Yeah. So if you take if you are taking about the data creation, like, even instrumentation side, if you're using, if you have an app that you wanted to capture certain things, the people are ingesting the data, it's actually the developers, and the developers define that schema that is kind of exposed to this one. So they do the modification even right now to kind of say what kind of an instrumentation they wanted to do that, whether they define that explicitly in a GitHub or not, it's still the developers are doing right now.
Okay. So essentially the first point of enforcement is where the data producers of the raw data sources are. Essentially, that's basically
Yeah.
what you're saying, right?
It could be one of the interface, right? So the data pipeline go through the multiple hop, and each and every hop produce a consumer dynamics changes. So where the hop, and then what is a tool, then how do we incorporate that? That is what's part of it essentially.
Right. So I think that answers probably my second question, where because there are too many data producers at the end of the day.
Right.
At every stage there is a producer, right?
Right. Yeah.
So what is that you're focusing right now on? Because obviously if the ingestion doesn't succeed, then anything you do downstream is not going to really work.
Exactly. Yeah. The schemata side of it, we are really focusing on the first very creation, like the developers and the data engineers, data analysts, dynamics, right? The reason why we are focusing on that a lot, the developers who has a very little or no incentive to create the high quality data products right now, like high quality data creations, right? And partly because it's not their fault. It's not like they don't want to create it. I don't believe anyone will purposely do that, but it is like a lack of understanding. Oh, I can't change this name. It's going to be breaking. And often the feedback right now happening, there is some change management has happened, and then there is a error being not even detected in the first hop of the pipeline. It might hit right in the end of the pipeline, and then it goes back to this tracking to the developer and say, like, oh, you need to fix it right now, and I want it right now. And the answer you will get always like, oh, let's put in the backlog, we'll figure it out later. because we have other high priority systems are breaking, right? So there's a, when we, the longer we delay, the more and more high priority kind of inserted here. And then you are now not trying to solve the data creation problem. You are trying to solve the optimization of a workload problem. So the problem statement completely changes. And we see that a lot of friction is happening at that point of a time. So that's why it's very important to incorporate in the CI/CD pipeline to give us a very immediate feedback.
Yeah,
So
one
there is
immediate use case I can think of, right, is in the whole data mesh, data product kind of landscape, greatly useful. But one question that I would have, I know we're on top of the hour, is how does it translate to existing warehouse BI native implementation? Probably Ananth, you should write about it or probably share an update with the forum. That's a question there. And there's another question privately sent to me around uh, can you do a demonstration of your product? Probably if you have a recording, do share it with us. I'll share
Yeah.
with the community. They want to see things in perspective. Probably that would a visual representation of whatever we speak would kind of help folks as well.
Okay. So what would be the forum to share? Is it the WhatsApp group or?
No. You can share it with me. I can share it. I'll put it on the Luma community page. That's a lot more easier, and I'll share the link with everyone.
Okay, option. Perfect.
Go ahead and share with anyone. Like that's okay. Meaning you can use WhatsApp, Slack, anything.
Okay.
But not all the people are there. But I think we had a lot of people register for it, so at least I'll get that to all of them. Right. I'll email them. Email it to
Totally.
them.
Totally. Love to do that.
Right.
Anantha, there's one more question for you.
Mhm.
A lot of these developer teams are not within the company. They're usually outsourced or they're
Right.
probably third party multi-tenant systems and all that. How do you see
Mhm.
this working with those kind of scenarios?
So even though developers are outside, they has to somewhere collaborate within this company, right? Like, I mean, they're not. So
And
when
I'm
you're
saying,
saying,
well, let's say multi-tenant kind of a system. How do you really enforce there? Let's say I'm just taking an example. Salesforce changes the schema. What do you do?
right?
Hello.
uh,
Good.
Yes,
is there another question?
Yeah.
I think somebody else.
yes. It's Sabrish here. So there are a lot of tools in the market, right, that collects metadata, right? Like when the table got updated, what is the last time you accessed this? So this data contract is an extended version of those metadata processing. Is it on how the processing will be happening? Because we need to have, we need to have extra thread or something to process this, right? So can you give some example on that?
Yeah.
That's
So
a good question. Yeah.
Rajesh, I'll come back to this question again. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So for this one, right? Data contract is not a metadata processing engine, right? The goal of the data contract essentially enable a conversation and a workflow between the producer and consumers to explicitly set the expectation between them. Similarly, how you define the API essentially. And you could use potentially this metadata information, programmatically process that information and create much more meaningful outcome. There are multiple ways that you can do. For example, if you are enforcing a PII in access restriction on top of PII information that nobody should be able to access that, you can make, if you define this access restriction in the data contract, you can enforce it. You can read that and you can place that on top of it. All right. So it is not a crawling engine. That's what I'm trying to kind of say. That
Yeah, it's not a catalog,
it's not a
essentially, right? I
catalog
think
like
it's not a
crawl.
catalog because how do you even achieve that in a catalog also today, right? So let's say something changes, you can only react to it. A catalog can detect the change and basically bring it up and you can say, hey, it's something is broken. A contract is like it doesn't allow you to change, right? Because that's a binding that you're enforcing. How it is enforced, probably we'll look into the demo that Anand shares with some examples there, right? And in my point of view, I think whatever you define in the contract, uh, at least for now, should go as a reference repository in your catalog. Because if you have a well-defined catalog which has adoption and people are using it, that's a big thing in quotes. If people are using it, then probably take those definitions or your links and whatever, and then populate your catalog and enrich your catalog with that, right, using custom attributes and all of it, right? So I know we are over time. Probably one last question. Anand, you want to take Rajesh's question? I know one more hand raised. Yeah.
Is there any
Anand,
other?
you want to take? No, I think we're good. I think you want to take Rajesh's question final and then
Yeah,
at least for the
totally. So the data creation process, if you're taking a data source, there is two types of data source. One is like the controlled data source and uncontrolled data source, right? Controlled data source is like within your premises that you can able to control and you can able to create the data. You have a lot of leverage over how the data getting created, how not data getting created. Whereas the systems like Salesforce and Zendesk, they does allow the custom data, custom object creation, or you can define your schema there. But you can still define somewhere and you can propagate that schema to somewhere else. It's not like the Salesforce object definition or Zendesk object definition is not something that it's changed out of the bond. The stakeholders might be different. It's up to us to kind of what interface that you wanted to do that. And there's a whole set of other systems, like, if you're taking IoT devices, healthcare equipments, for example, those things, because the producer is not in your control at this point of a time. So that has to be like an explicit org level negotiation of how the data created rather than systematic enforcement. So data contract right now is really focusing on within this preliminaries, how can we control this data essentially? Like what about that it's in your control? How can we produce the data, high quality data products? Does it make sense, right?
It does. Another. I think the very interesting thing about this whole thing is essentially today we have a lot of places where we have control, but if you're actually in India, a lot of these organizations use multi-tenant systems, multi-tenant SaaS. And often what happens is, for instance, just to give an example of banking and financials, it's very easy to break because half of the tables and the derived tables actually don't make sense. They are too legacy. A very easy way to break a contract is you just create a version 1 of that particular table and go start changing, and the old one becomes stale. And the data contract will not even come to know that the old one is no longer being used by until you get to a point where the numbers start looking wrong, right? So what developers do in practice in many of these systems is they just go create version 1 or version 2, and that only they would know in many cases that they are the more latest and the greatest, and the old one which you're monitoring is actually now gone.
Right.
So
practical difficulties.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
As I mentioned, right, like, the data contract much more efficient when you are trying, like, let's say that the engineers who are changing this version 1 and version 2, and there are certain consumers going to consume that. And if you wanted to collaborate or communicate that is where the data contract come into play and say, like, hey, this is when they manage the version by themselves, at that point of a time, they became the producer. And
no, but look, in this case also they have created, but they probably use a Oracle interface or a SQL Server interface. There's no CI/CD pipeline. They just probably would just copy a table and create another one. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right.
The easier way around, which every developer does.
Yes.
Yeah. So my point of, from whatever little I see in some of these sectors, this is a very common way to break things up.
Yeah.
The pipelines break because just the copies and copies and copies of the versions that move around, essentially.
Right. Yeah.
Perfect. Then I know we're 7 minutes over time. Thank you for everyone who had stayed back, and thank you everyone who would potentially listen to this recording also. Thanks, Ananth, for this great session. Looking forward to your demo video, which somebody has asked, and I think looking into that, people may put things into perspective, right? I think great conversations around contracts. I think it's going to be a year where data contract as a new category in the data engineering space is going to evolve, and it's just going to become better and bigger from here. Right. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Have a good day ahead. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.